The Cambridge Dictionary defines power as the ability to control people and events. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines power like this: possession of control, authority, or influence over others. Now, in both these definitions, there is one key word that is missing from both. The word is absolute. In both dictionaries, power is defined by being limited in nature. In other words, it does not possess the absolute quality to control people or to control events without limit. I think the reason for this lies in the fact that, well, we are creatures of God, and we do not possess absolute sovereign control or unchallenged authority over people and events. You know, that designation belongs to God alone. God's power is total. It's complete. It's utter. It's perfect and absolute. Moses tells us in Genesis 1 that the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and he did this by speaking, and it was so. David declares in Psalm 33:9 that the Lord spoke and it came to be. He commanded and it stood firm. The writer of Hebrews declares that the Lord upholds all things by the power of his word in chapter 1 there. And the Apostle Paul says something similar of Christ in Colossians 1. He says, in him, Jesus, all things hold together. The people of Jeremiah's prophecy, in that day, God asked them a rhetorical question in chapter 33, and he says, behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is there anything too hard for me? Daniel says in chapter 4, verse 35, that God does what he wills with the host of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. And Job, after being rebuked by the Lord, he declares in chapter 42 that I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. The Apostle John simply testifies that the Lord omnipotent reigns in the book of Revelation. The Lord Almighty reigns. Now, King Ahasuerus in the book of Esther, he is the king of all the known world at that time. He has influence over his subjects. He has authority over all the people, both free and slave. He can control individuals to do his will. He most certainly wields great power. But as we will read, he does not have absolute power. He is limited in his power. Chapter 1 of Esther reveals how Ahasuerus does not have limitless power, but is limited in power due to his own self-perception. He is deceived. He has a self-perception that he has limitless power, but as we will see, in a very ironic, simple way, he does not. Follow along in chapter 1 as I read verses 1 through 9. Now in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces, in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the capital, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all of his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and the governors of the provinces were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains, and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple, to silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion, for the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. And Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. In these verses, we are introduced to this main character that we're going to see throughout the story. The main character is King Ahasuerus. He is the king of the Persian Empire. He is the son, the grandson of Cyrus the Persian, the same Cyrus who defeated Babylon and set the Jews free. It is this king, also known as Xerxes, the same guy, this powerful king whose kingdom has expanded to 127 different territories. Well, he comes to power in 486 BC, and he will rule till 465 BC. The setting is in Susa, Persia. This is the capital. This is where the citadel is, the fortified tower where the king resides. And according to verse 3, this is in the third reign, or the third year of his reign. He has been ruling for 3 years, making the year 483 BC. Well, King Ahasuerus, he is going to throw a party, the party of all parties, a festive feast for all the officials and servants of the army of Persia and Media and the nobles and the governors of all the provinces, says verse 3. This would be done at the king's expense. Nothing left out. The best drink, the best food, the best entertainment. This is a real party. The best party that you could imagine. It's a party that lasts for 180 days. 6 months. This is how long the king gave and gave and gave to this party for the people to enjoy. I mean, just imagine spending 6 months of your lives doing nothing but getting up day after day to go to a feast on somebody else's dime. Well, the feasts are for all the subjects to enjoy, as I said. It did not matter. From the most royal and regal to the servants to the foot soldier, everybody in the king's kingdom was invited. It says here that even Media, that is a nation. If you know your history, it is the Medo-Persian Empire. They are the ones who took Babylon out. But here in the days of Ahasuerus, Persia has become the dominant force. And so from here on out, you always see it is Persia and Media. Persia are the dominant ones, and even Media is there. Furthermore, verse 5 tells us that Ahasuerus, at the end of 180 days, he gave a week-long feast. He did it in the court of the garden of the king's palace, still in luxury. And he did this for all the great and small of the city of Susa. You know those common folks, the ones that are footing the bill for this party? He throws them a week-long party. Well, even Queen Vashti, she wants to get on the action, so she throws a party for the women. And she does it in the palace, it says in verse 9. Well, verses 6 and 7, they make us aware of what sort of bill the king was tallying up. The great and the small, they were footing this feast. It was most certainly on their taxes. Ahasuerus was known as an extravagant king who liked to empty the coffers of the city. And so he uses the most extravagant materials that man could unearth and fashion. I mean, look at the list. Fine linen of white and dyed purple curtains, ornate silver, beautiful marble. There's pure gold. There are great pictures made from purple stones. That is what porphyry is. It's mosaics that are made out of colorful stones and precious jewels. He has couches that are lined in silver and gold and what's called mother of pearl. That's the shiny part inside an oyster. He spares no expense. He's so extravagant in this that he just lavishes this on the people. Well, there was also not any cheap red cups for drinking at this party. They were drinking out of golden vessels of all types, served in golden cups and golden jugs, these vessels that everyone drank from freely. And not only that, it says that the wine that they had was royal wine. This is the king's private stock. This is the best of the best. And so they are being lavished upon with this, with the best decor, drink, and dinnerware. And then the author adds this little detail in verse 8. There he says, and drinking was according to this edict. There was no compulsion, for the king had given orders to all of his staff of the palace to do as each man desires. Now you're going to see edicts or decrees throughout the book of Esther, so I want to talk about it briefly. It's important that we grasp what they are. Edicts were orders or laws that were put in place that came from the king's lips. And when an edict was put in place, it was law, and it was binding, and you could not change it. His subjects must follow it, period. Well, when it comes to the edict here, he says you are to drink without compulsion. Meaning there was, in those days in the Persian Empire, as the king drank, you had to drink. So every time he threw one back, you were expected to. You were under compulsion. You were compelled. But the king says here, let every man drink freely. That's quite nice of the king to allow drunkenness to happen at your own pace, as opposed to when you're told to get drunk. Well, as you can imagine, it's not a big deal for the king to drink like that and drink and drink. He doesn't have anywhere to be on Monday morning or Sunday morning to church. And so he drank, and they all drank with him without compulsion. Now I want to ask this, in these first 9 verses, what's the point of this feast? Why do it? Is it because he's such a loving king? History would say otherwise. It seems that the point of all this is so that he can display his power. He wants to throw the party of parties so that everybody knows exactly how powerful he is. He wanted to flaunt his authority. He wanted to demonstrate his control over the kingdom. And maybe you don't know this, but most ancient Near Eastern kings thought themselves to be gods. Ahasuerus was no different. He thought he was a god. Ahasuerus would also want to display his power to manipulate. It's going to be just 1 year from this scene that he's going to try to invade Greece. And so most certainly he is there with all the nobles, the governors, all the high places of people trying to get support, trying to get help. He would need all the help that he could get to go against the Greeks. If you've ever seen the movie 300, that movie is loosely based on this. There's some factual things there. And if you understand the movie, when Ahasuerus or Xerxes comes against the Greeks, he loses at first. It's disastrous. Well, maybe he just wanted to display his power because he wanted to be loved. A 6-month-long party to be loved by the people because he had a horrible reputation. Eventually, even one of his own advisors would assassinate him. Whatever the reason, history bears out that Ahasuerus was a megalomaniac. He was obsessed with power, with his own power. He thought he had power over poverty, power over riches. He thought he had power over life and power over death. He's not much different than us because we operate under these same assumptions. We don't need to look any further than our own government officials who pretend to have power over these things. Unlimited power. Or look to the self-help guru who promises power to us. And whatever we're searching for, there's a guru to help us find that. But we also have the same assumptions even when it comes to religion. Religion promises power. Now, here's what I mean by that. There's a growing belief in Christianity that we have the power to declare reality. If I believe I can be rich, I can speak that into existence. If I want to be healed, all I need to do is speak to that and declare it as a reality. You see, my words have power because they are God's words. And because I repeat those words, I have power. I can simply find a verse of God's promise. I can name the verse. I can claim the verse. And the promise is mine as soon as I unleash the power by my tongue. Well, when I release the power, I become absolutely powerful. I release the power of God through my words. I have creative power like God does, and that effectively makes me God. That is pure blasphemy in the highest form. If God spoke the worlds into existence and me as a child of God, why can't I do the same is the reasoning. It's foolishness. It's pure foolishness, and even worse, it's idolatry. Because we are creatures. We have been made. We do not possess in and of ourselves the power to create. We are not the creator who speaks what's called ex nihilo. Out of nothing God speaks and creates. We do not possess such power. For the Lord has said, I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. That seems pretty plain, but not to everyone. Well, nor do I possess the power to save my own soul from God's judgment. This is as old as the Bible. Yet people still believe they possess power to get into heaven by their works. Even Christians who claim that it's all by the grace of God, Jesus alone, still can fall into the trap of thinking works somehow get them there. Whether it's through Mass, or through baptism, or through communion, or by feeding the poor, or through prayer, or by giving, or through membership, through last rites, or through marriage, even by just being a good person. To go to heaven by any other means than faith in Christ, to believe that there is some other way, something added to it, is to worship another God. Paul declared in Ephesians 2, in a very narrow-minded way, this: for by grace you have been saved through faith. It is not of yourselves. It is a gift of God. It is not of works, lest any man should boast. And Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, and no man comes to the Father except through me. Very plain, very straightforward. You must believe this to be saved. You must go through Christ and Him alone. Otherwise, you will perish even by your good works. And just as deadly as the notion of that is this thinking that we can help God. We can help God get the sinner over that final hurdle. In other words, we can manipulate people to get them to believe. This has been going on for quite some time in the church. This is the belief that God has made a way. Even most of the way, almost all the way to the sinner. And that I must finish the transaction by making that final step. By taking that final leap of faith, I complete the transaction. Now, in order to get to that last step, I have to do a few things. One, we must manipulate sermons. We must change sermons without using that offensive language. You know, words like sin and wrath and hatred. Because we don't want to scare people. We do this because we want to manipulate them to elicit a response from them. Second, we tailor our music into thoughtlessness, and we put in over repetition to move emotions only, and we are never interested in the mind, the truth. We do this because to repeat over and over and over is to put the mind on autopilot, but to engage the emotions to elicit the response that we desire. Third, we can weaken the gospel of Jesus by removing the bad news of sin. That's right. When we talk about the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, it's not devoid of the bad news. The bad news is, I am an affront to God. I am an offense to God. I have come into this world sinful and a sinner. And those hard words that we read in Psalm 7, and God is angry with the wicked every day. The bad news that God will judge me because I am guilty. And I am on my way to eternal hell. There is personal responsibility, something we do not like anymore. I am responsible for me, my sin, my rejection. That is the bad news. But we like to leave that out because it's much nicer to say that God loves you and has a plan for you to help us over that hump into heaven, to elicit that response. Listen, to believe all of what I just said, which we've all heard, is purely pagan. It is completely pagan. It is serving another God made in our image and in our likeness. Because that is not the God of Scripture. Listen, when it comes to salvation, Jesus said with man it is impossible. Salvation is impossible with man, but with God all things are possible. For you were dead in sins. You were haters of God. You are condemned to eternal death. But then Christ says, awaken, O sinner. And the light of Christ will shine on you, and you will cry out in faith, have mercy on me. That is the gospel. Well, in a twist of irony, Ahasuerus was able to exercise his power over all of his subjects. They all came to the feast. He was able to make them come. Great and small, it didn't matter. But in a twist of irony, he could not control his wife. The most powerful king over 127 different territories could not control his wife, and she showed him just how limited his power is. Look again in verses 10 through 12. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehaman, Biztha, Harbana, Bigtha, Abitha, Zethar, and Carcass. That's a fine name. And the seven eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. At this, the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. Well, there's another irony here too in this situation about the king exercising control over others. Verse 10 says that he was merry with wine. A clear reference that he was drunk. He could control others, but he couldn't control himself. His heart was drunk, and we now start to hear the power-hungry hubris, the pride coming out of him. He commands his eunuchs to bring the queen forth. Bring her forth with her crown, that she can show the peoples her beauty. In other words, my translation here, go bring out my wife, make sure she's all decked out, tell her to parade around in front of everybody, just so they can see how good looking my wife is. That is what he is saying. The indication is clear. Vashti is beautiful. Ahasuerus knows it, and he wants everybody else to see it and give him accolades. Well, this power move failed. Verse 12, the queen refuses. She flat out refuses the king's command. And then it says that he is enraged, and his anger burned within him. He is no God. His will has been thwarted. He does not possess absolute power. His wife has publicly rejected his command. We don't know why. We're not told the reason. But we know that his power is limited. He can fume all he wants at being disobeyed, but he is still powerless to make her obey. It must have been embarrassing for the supposed all-powerful king who spends 6 months displaying all of his pomp and circumstance, all of his riches, all of his glory and power, to be simply overshadowed in one moment when his wife says, no. Let me confess something to you. I don't like being told no. I'm guessing neither do you. Being told no gives us a reality check. It reminds us that our power is really nothing more than self-perception. We think ourselves to be powerful, but it is only one little no in opposition to our will that we will rage and burn in anger. When my boss says no, or my wife says no, or my child says no, I burn in anger sometimes. And when God says no, sometimes I burn there. Hearing no is God's way of putting all of us in check. It's that time when his Spirit whispers to me, you are powerless. Jesus lived on earth under this reality. He understood that God controlled all things. He understood that no power was inherent in him. After Christ's arrest, he stands before Pilate, silent, in John 19:10. And Pilate is asking him questions, and Jesus will not answer. And Pilate is irritated. He says, why won't you answer me? Will you not speak to me? And then Pilate says these words, do you not know that I have authority? Do you not know that I have power to release you? Do you not know that I have the authority to crucify you? Jesus answered and said to him, you have no power over me. You have no authority over me unless it had been given to you from above. Nothing can happen to me unless it's been granted by God. We are just as foolish to believe we possess absolute power and authority. Every time we rage when we're told no, we're guilty of breaking God's law. You shall have no other gods before me. That is the law we break every time we are told no, and we rage and our anger burns within us because we are worshiping us. I am worshiping me. No is God's way of reminding us you are not in control of a thing. Your power is so small and so weak and so limited. I will tell you no. Well, let's look at the last section. Follow along as I read verses 13 through 22. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure towards all who were versed in law and judgment, the men next to him being Karshena, Sethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti, because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs? Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and in the officials, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who are in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will be made known to all the women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought forth before him, and she did not come. This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will say the same to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath in plenty. If it please the king, let a royal order go out before him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all the kingdom, for it is vast, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. This advice pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, to every people in its own language, that every man be master of his own household and speak according to the language of the people. It's very interesting. Well, the king, at this point, he's just enraged. He has faced humiliation. He is pretty much saying, how dare you defy me? and he wants punishment against her. And it does not seem something unusual here because his heart is merry with wine. He's not thinking straight. And so he asks his trusted counselors, those who sit before him, before his face, in his presence, constantly. They are the first in the kingdom. It's interesting that there's a historian named Herodotus. He lived at the same time as Ahasuerus, and he lived through this. He understood exactly what was taking place. Why the king would ask these men what to do. Quote, if an important decision is being made, the Persians discuss the questions when they are drunk. And following the next day, the master of the house, the one who's going to remind them, the master of the house where the discussion was held, he submits their decision for reconsideration when they are sober. If they still approve of it, it's adopted. If not, it's abandoned. Conversely, any decision that they make when they are sober is reconsidered when they are drunk. This is how the Persians made decisions. Spur of the moment, anger. He gets counsel. Presumably, they're all drunk. The master of the house the next day will then say, hey, do you remember what you're talking about yesterday? Do you still want to go forward with that? No. Or yes. That is how it was done. Well, it seems that a little time has gone by because verse 13 starts with the word then. It's a time word. We know the little time's gone by. So they're there at the royal feast. She refuses to come out. He talks to his trusted counselors. Some time goes by and they make a decision. Oh, by the way, I really like verses 13 here and 16. It's because Ahasuerus goes all third person on us. I love people who go third person. Verse 13 says, then the king said to his wise men, in verse 16, according to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti, because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus? It's gone third person. I love it when athletes and musicians and politicians, they refer to themselves in the third person. It shows their pride for sure. They believe they're so powerful. Well, if Troy says it, Troy does it. Troy wants it, Troy gets it, right? It's so foolish. And by the way, if you're around me and you go third person, I will give you pastoral mockeries like you've never had. Because I love you, and so I will mock you. Well, Vashti's fate is decided in verse 19. Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. She has been cut off. You cannot come before my face. And her position as queen will be given to another. She's going to be stripped of her crown. Now, most certainly, if she goes before him, it's assumed she's going to die. And so, you're away from my face, and you will no longer have a crown. Verse 17 says that for the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt. That is the reason for the decree. They have decided that every woman in the kingdom will look at their husband with contempt. Therefore, a law needs to be made to put them in order, to set them straight. According to verse 18, the king's counselors were so concerned about this that they had the king okay this edict and let's get it sent out. And this advice pleased the king. And so a royal letter was drafted saying all women will give honor to their husbands. All women, high and low, will give honor to their husbands. No caveat there. They'll just do it. And it'll be sent throughout the Persian territory in a script to every person in their own language. No one's exempt from this. If you speak something other than Persian, you're getting it in your language, and you must follow the law. This episode in the drama, it's all stemmed from one woman's refusal to bow to the king's perceived power. He believed himself to be all-powerful, but she showed him he's limited in that power. And throughout this episode, I want you to see this. These have just been ordinary people doing ordinary things in the ordinary lives. This is the mundane stuff of life. Very ordinary. And what I mean by that statement is you don't find miracles in this book. You don't see supernatural miracles taking place. I believe that God has worked miracles for our edification. Miracles are those works of God that they defy reason. They go against the laws of nature, the laws of physics. For instance, when God overshadows Mary in the book of Luke, and she's found with child, this is a miracle. This is not to be duplicated. This is something only God can do, where the Lord Jesus is formed in her womb. But what we read in this chapter and throughout the book is this. God is providentially writing history through the choices of ordinary people. He's doing this through their choices who are bound to their own wills. And he's doing it to bring his predetermined plan to completion without overriding their sin-bound wills. That's important. This is how powerful God is. He allows people to be themselves. And in that, without miracle, he still brings about his predetermined plan without fail. Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans of a mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." We all have plans in our minds, but it's only by the purpose of God, by his will, that anything will stand. And if it's his will, it stands. Isaiah records this in chapter 46. God is speaking. He says, "For I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient time things not done yet, saying, my counsel shall stand and I will accomplish all my purposes. I have spoken, I will bring it to pass. I have purposed, I will do it." That is a statement of absolute power. That is not arrogance. That is nothing more than God, who is all-powerful. So his purpose has come to pass. In times past, miracles, yes, he used miracles, but God does not ordinarily do miracles. No, God works in ordinary, plain ways in our lives. When a person's life is supernaturally preserved from some sort of illness, disease, God uses ordinary means to heal the person's body. He has given our bodies the capability of healing. He uses ordinary means to heal, or medicine invented by a doctor. When the church is supernaturally born, he uses ordinary means of preaching. When a sinner supernaturally calls upon the name of the Lord and is rescued from death, God works through ordinary means of evangelism. I want us to see, as we go through Esther, not to be looking for the hidden, for the special, for the supernatural. But God works primarily through providence, not through miracles. He works ordinarily, primarily through providence. The true power in this book is God, who quietly brings his purposes to pass. Pray with me.